Hey all you fellow team members out there for Strategic Adjustments, I'm Josh Grover. Super excited to be here in Pittsburgh, right outside Heinz Field. We're bringing you the second video of this 4-part series on how to get better at poker. Today I'm going to be telling you about the mathematical side, the logical side, board texturing, all super important things to add to your game. I'm going to tell you why they're important. I'm going to tell you how to implement these things into your game, where to learn them. However, I won't be going into too much depth, otherwise the video would just be too long. I'll be making other videos on each individual subject later on for you guys. Just make sure that you take in this information and you go out there and you study these things that I'm going to tell you about today. Don't go anywhere. Alright everybody, we're going to roll right into why math is important for your game. Math is important for your game for multiple reasons. You're going to be put in a lot of spots where you're going to be questioning whether it's the right call or not, right raise spot or not, and if you don't have the psychology behind the hand, you can always go towards the math route. Now, math comes into more play with the less blinds that you have. At least that's my philosophy. The deeper I am, the less mathematical I am, and the smaller blinds I have, the more mathematical I become on my decision making. Now, it's really important to integrate both mathematical and psychological side of the game, and these are really important concepts to know and to have down pat, especially for internet poker, when the majority of your decisions are going to be mathematical. Now, I'm going to go into importance of percentages. Percentages are really important to know when you have hand versus hand situations, because what's going to happen is you're going to have a hand yourself and you're going to think of the other possible hands the person can have. Should you get all in or not against those hands, and what your percentage of winning will be. Now, a lot of people know the percentages after it gets all in, which is all good and dandy, but you need to know beforehand, if you get it in against other hands in that spot, what your mathematical advantage is or disadvantage. To find out where to learn percentages, I'm going to come out with a video in the future. You guys can always tune in for that. You can always look for other videos on YouTube. You can go, you can go to Google, and there's going to be articles and blogs on it, and you can learn it there as well, or your books that you can read. Next thing I'm going to talk about, I'm going to roll right into, is pot odds and implied odds. The importance of pot odds is knowing the amount of money that you put in for your percentage to make a hand, and implied odds goes in that same category, because if you actually make your hand, how much more can you make? And that's where the psychology plays in for implied odds as well, because not every time when you actually make your hand will you win a larger pot than what's already there. If the other person puts you on what you have, that can get a little bit confusing. I will go super in depth on implied odds and pot odds. However, these are things that you need to know. Super important. A huge part of a lot of people's game. People who don't know psychology really well, if you know your pot odds and a little bit of implied odds, you can still be a winning player. Next thing I'm going to talk about is bet sizing and pot sizes. Now, bet sizing is super important for long run. In the short run, it might not make as big of a difference, but if you're looking at a lot of situations, and this comes with board texturing as well, your bet sizing will either make a huge difference in the amount of money you make or lose in the long run. Huge difference. And the reason why you need to know your pot sizes is your bet sizing will vary depend on your pot size, and your bet sizing will vary dependent on board texture and opponent as well. Now, this can get super deep. I could talk about this forever. However, you need to get out there, you need to learn these things. These are super important to get into your game. Next thing I'm going to go into is hand ranges. Go learn hand ranges. Now, hand ranges are a little bit more important for tournament, I believe, than cash game, just because tournament people are going to be playing more tight to the vest for the most part, and you're able to put them on a hand range a lot easier, where in cash games you're going to be playing a lot different styles, a lot of different kinds of players who are going to be all over the place. Especially if you're playing lower limit, you're not going to be able to put a lot of people on hand ranges because they're limp calling queen 3 and you just would have no idea. In any case like that, you would just be going for value and you wouldn't really even be trying to put them on a hand range. It's really difficult. But hand ranges are crazy important for tournament play. It's really important to know hand ranges if you're up against better opponents, and that way you're gonna know when to do things like check raise, check call, get in more value, stuff like that, and be able to 3-bet bluff, 4-bet bluff, all these kind of things. All those all that extra stuff that comes in with your game that builds your profit even more, that comes from learning hand ranges for the most part. The next thing you definitely need to learn is bankroll management. Now the best way to learn bankroll management is to learn what variance is, and depending on the type of player that you are, you're gonna need more buy-ins than others, and depending on where you tilt at as well will come into effect. Certain people I've told before, you know, are okay with 15 to 20 buy-ins, where there's others that need 40 and some that need 10. It really is super dependent on your type of style of your game that you play and how quickly you tilt and how used to the game level that you're playing at. Now what variance is percentages play out over time. So let's say I get it in 70% against 30% 5 times in a row and lose all of them. This will happen. Luck is a part of the game. This is why so many people play. It's why so many bad players win in short periods of time. A bad player could have 20 wins in a row in a month. It just happens. That's what variance is. Someone can run really hot. They can win a lot of hands. Now percentages, however, over a long period of time will eventually be correct. They will play out. It will be a truth pretty much, and you'll be really close. I mean, you're never going to be spot on with that percentage over time, but you're gonna get closer and closer as the more time that it's spread out. So what you want to do is obviously keep getting your money in as best spots as possible, because over time those percentages will play out. They will get you the money. And one big misconception that I think a lot of players have is that the more aggressive players have higher variance, which isn't always true, because the more aggressive players are winning a lot of the small pots the majority of the time, which meaning when they get their money in the 50-50s or 60-40s, they have all that extra dead money from the smaller pots, which controls their variance more, where a bad player who's blinding down and then gets it in a 60-40, there's just a weird dynamic there, where if you really look at it in the long run, a more aggressive player's graph is going to be a little bit more linear, where a tight player's graph might actually have a little bit more variance in it, which is kind of funny. It's not always the case, but if you look at it that way, which I have over a long run, it does actually play out that way a lot of the time. So that was the mathematical side of the game that I was explaining to all of you. Make sure you get out there, you read some books, you watch some videos. Stay tuned for my videos. I'm gonna go way, way, way more in depth on all that stuff. We're gonna roll right into board texturing now in mechanics. How many rooms do you have left? The next thing I'm going to tell you all of you about on how to get better at your game, how to get better at poker, is the mechanics behind the game and board texturing. So when I go into this concept, like I said, I'm not going to get super deep into it. I'm just going to tell you why it's important to add to your game. Make sure you go out there and you figure out and you get more in depth with it. I'll make other videos, I'll get out there and I'll help you guys as well. But if you want to get extremely good with your game, this is the stuff you really need to learn. This will push you to an elite level, I promise you that. So let's talk about learning bet sizing based on the board texture. I did a little bit earlier on in the video. All of your bet sizing is going to depend on what the board brings. The board texture is just the cards that are on the flop or turn or river. Now, something such as a dry board, which is queen 3-3, ace deuce deuce, no flush draws, very little straight draws. Just a lot of times people can't connect with the board. Your bet sizing is going to be smaller based on these reasons, that less hands can call and you can represent the same hand as betting larger as you would smaller. Little things like this over the long run, you'll save a lot of money and make a lot of money. These are really, really important things to learn and to put into your game. And like I said, I promise you, if you really study board textures and really study bet sizing, your game could go from amateur, mediocre to an elite level very, very quickly. Now I'm going to talk to you about floating. What it means to float is just to call with nothing, pretty much planning to bet or raise later, to bluff them later on. Floating comes into play a lot more against better players. you can represent stronger hands by calling most of the time. If you call against a bad player, that doesn't really mean much to them at all. It just means you call. But when you call against a good player, you're representing something, whether it's a draw or a pair, top pair, a set, something in that matter. So floating comes into play when you're against better players, and you can use this concept to your advantage. Anytime you're moving up stake levels, you need to study stuff like this, like floating, when to float, the board textures to float, when to float out of position, when to float in position. Check raising is a big one to implement in your game, and so many people just check raise without realizing what they're representing. Start studying on what it means when you check raise. What are you telling people you have when you check raise? This is all really important stuff as well. And learning the logic side, this can get really confusing for some people, but the really big nerds in poker will understand this. The logic side is saying, if I choose option A, B, or C, or D, which would be, say, check, fold, raise, or call, then their options are the same, check, raise, fold, or call, which means options 1, 2, and 3 of, it could mean they're calling with nothing, it could mean they're calling with a draw, it could mean they're calling with a pair. And using deductive reasoning and figuring out your logic of where they're most likely to be on your A, B, or C, 1, 2, or 3, you can actually mathematically figure out what your best decision is. Now this can get extremely confusing. However, online, if you do this properly, you will be a winning player, I promise you that. I would stay away from it in live games, especially if you're playing against a lot of fish more often. I would stay away from deductive reasoning like that and go more with the psychological side of the game. However, if you use deductive reasoning properly, like I said, in online poker, you will be a winning player. So it's probably one of the hardest things to learn in a proper way. I've studied it a lot, and to me it was really confusing in the beginning. I've gotten better with it, but if you want to just study the logic side, if A then B, then 1, 2, 3, just to give you an example, that will also help you a lot with your game. I hope I've taught you guys some things today a little bit. Like I said, I didn't go really in depth. I'm just giving you an outline, a guide of how to get better at poker with the math and logic side of things, board texturing. Keep watching my videos. I'll put out some awesome, more in-depth stuff, super important stuff for your game. I hope you're all getting better. I hope you're all making more money. Make sure you comment, like, subscribe below. We'll see y'all next time.